Almost everyone likes Left 4 Dead, or some variant of that game. Aside from being a zombie game, and even nowadays people still like zombies, it's an easy way to have a good time with some friends. Also an easy way to crap your pants when you open a door and a tank is hiding behind it. That happened to me like 10 years ago and I'm still salty about it. Thank you, Valve, for that particular run of Dark Carnival. Sure enough, when you transfer the formula to other universes, it works wonders. Sometimes it flops, like Back 4 Blood, but sometimes we get a banger, or at least a banger after enough content is finally added in. Thus, do we come to the Ubersreik Five, the protagonists of the Vermintide games, and proof that in order to make a difference, sometimes you just need a group of morons too thick to realize the odds. They're an unlikely crew, that bunch. A witch hunter, a witch, an elf, a dwarf, and a mostly regular dude. And while it may simply be my endless favoritism of Warhammer fantasy, this is my favorite crew in any of these kinds of games. Their dialogue, their personalities, the people writing for Vermintide, which, fun fact, includes Matt Ward, knew how to make a likable group of fellas. So today, we talk about them. For before Ubersreik to the mountains around Helmgart, these 5 brave souls have killed more Skaven than anyone but Thanquil, so let's just see what the story is of the brave Ubersreik 5. Or 4, it doesn't matter. But since I know a good chunk of you are watching this while you get ready to sleep, you know how you can make that experience all the better? Because you can do so with Helix, the sponsor of this video. Helix makes mattresses, but not simple mattresses for you to just lie down and sleep on. These are nothing but the finest of mattresses ever built by mankind, the pinnacle of sleepy time technology that we have achieved. Every time Helix is ranked against competing brands, it smashes the competition, with the Midnight Lux in particular ranked the best overall mattress by companies like Forbes and Wired. They're perfect for you, and I don't just mean that in a general way. By taking the Helix Sleep Quiz, which is like 2 minutes of your time tops, Helix matches you with the mattress to perfectly suit your needs as a sleeper. I've got the Helix Midnight Lux, and it is wonderful. With a brand new mattress from my new place, I'm sleeping better than ever, and with the Helix mattress toppers available, you can make your Helix mattress a whole new level of comfortable. Be it a mattress topper for those with back pain, a mattress topper for 2 people with different habits, or a just plain comfortable premium mattress topper for some extra comfort, Helix has you covered to make sure you get a good night's rest. To get yourself an unmatched Helix mattress, I've just the thing for you. Go to helixsleep.com/pancreasnowork to get yourself 27% off your order. That's helixsleep.com/pancreasnowork for 27% off your order. If you're going to spend a third of your day sleeping, you'd best be sleeping as well as you can, so get yourself a Helix mattress today so tonight can be so much better. Now then, let's discuss what happens when 5 idiots break any sort of power scaling for Warhammer Fantasy over their knees. As a quick overview of how these lot came together, it is of course in the first game of Vermintide. For a variety of reasons different to each hero, every single one of the Ubersreik 5 found themselves in the city of Ubersreik. Though some of them had little to do with the rest of the group, and none of them had any actual personal relationships prior to the game, they all found themselves unlikely allies in a turbulent time. Turns out, a Skaven invasion by an entire clan of the rats is a great way to make new friends if you aren't first dragged down underground to either be enslaved, eaten, or both. The actual events and story of the games themselves, I won't go over much here. Not only is it a Left 4 Dead clone series, so the story is largely an excuse to kill rats in different locations, but there's a much better way to experience it if you want than just listening to me yap. Go play Vermintide, you clown. Go on, play Vermintide 2 at least. It's a fun game, it's better than Darktide. I promise you, just because it isn't wearing the skin of 40k doesn't mean it isn't the superior Left 4 Dead clone. Lacking any better way to go through the characters, I'll just do it in the order they appear in the character selection screen. That means we start with your average, everyday Imperial, who's also a knight, a Grail Knight, and one of the loudest men in all of history. Even for a man who hates anything that has to do with Bretonnia such as myself, you'd be hard-pressed to find a man harder to like than good old Markus Kruber. He's a friendly, outgoing sort who, despite a rather traumatic backstory, is the kind of bloke you'd be happy to go grab a pint with at the local pub. God only knows that if I had the chance to go drinking with Markus and Bardin, I'd kill people for the pleasure. Markus Kruber is a homegrown Reiklander by birth, actually from Ubersreik itself. Born a farmer, he wanted to do just about anything else but farming, and instead joined the militia of the town of Grunsberg. He climbed through the ranks by being a charismatic, highly competent fella, and perhaps in another timeline could have become a true hero of the Empire. At the very least, I'm sure the Reiksguard would love to have him. But he got into let's say an argument with the commander of the militia. The commander, being an incompetent petty asshole, reassigned him to duty in the imperial province of Ostland. For those of you unfamiliar with the Empire of Man, Ostland sucks. The day-to-day life of an Ostlander involves being attacked by chaos, being attacked by beastmen, which are also chaos, being attacked by undead, being occasionally attacked by Kislev, In those rare moments it isn't being attacked by someone, it's still one of the poorest provinces in the Empire, being truly beaten out only by the indescribable pile of human filth that is Stirland. May Sigmar forgive me for even uttering its name. Naturally, this kind of reassignment is the sort of one where you're not intended to come back from alive, but Markus Kruber is far too awesome to let that kind of thing kill him. He instead trained his unit in one of the finest you could ever ask for, because between his charisma and general levels of competence, he could probably train even the laziest of bastards into some damn fine soldiers. They took on the worst enemies that Ostland had to offer and always came out on top. Norskins, beastmen, bandits, probably other Imperials on occasion. There was nothing that could keep Markus and his lads down. Until, of course, the vampire counts caused a ruckus. Little bit of trivia for you here. Apparently the Empire of Man doesn't number battles at the location known as Hel Fen anymore. At least according to Kruber, this isn't for an insidious big brother reason, but because they're worried if they number them, then vampires will be encouraged to try harder to make their battle the one that succeeds. As for the area itself, it's a dreary, dismal swamp located in Sylvania, where vampires rule the living and death magic runs wild. During a battle here, Markus and his unit were part of the fighting when an older gentleman walked up to their line. This was, of course, a necromancer who proceeded to cast a giant purple orb. This was the Purple Sun of Xerius, which in Total Warhammer is a powerful vortex spell, and from my understanding of old Warhammer fantasy, a great way to get called a slur as you erase someone's strongest model if they fail a single initiative test. Exactly one person survived this entire affair, Markus Kruber, who lived because he was pushed out of the way of the attack by a man who was turned into dust in front of him. Rather understandably, he requested to leave the military after this, because trauma doesn't even begin to describe that, but he was denied because the Empire always needs more capable soldiers. Sometime after this, however, he was recruited into the service of one Victor Saltzpyre, witch hunter extraordinaire, and soon to be escorting the bright wizard Sienna Fuegonasus to trial for heresy. Markus heads together with him to the trial, which of course takes him to the city of Ubersreik, and then the game happens and Markus discovers he, alongside his 5 new companions, are perhaps the best people on the planet at killing Skaven, with the possible exceptions of Gotrek, Felix, and of course Thanquol. But that last one doesn't really count, because no one's as good at getting Skaven killed as Thanquol is. Of course, Markus Kruber isn't just a Ratman killer. As it turns out in Vermintide 2, he may have come from farmers, but going back far enough, one of those farmers was nothing less than a Grail Knight that decided to settle down in the Empire. Discovering his true name of Markus de Mandalot, and no, I will not learn how to say those words properly, he supped from the cup of the Lady in the Lake and became a full-fledged Grail Knight. Usually there's a questing process involved in that, but I feel like we can all make the safe assumption that once your Skaven kill count enters the quintuple digits, the lady will also make the assumption that you're probably just worthy of it already. The transformation may have been deeply upsetting to Victor, but it only made Markus stronger. It should be noted that alternatively, Markus Kruber could have become a mercenary, become an Empire Foot Knight, which is basically the same thing as a Grail Knight but not magical, or become a Huntsman, which is his ranged focus class. Those are all canon choices, mind you, which I'll discuss when we get to Bardin. Well, with the Grail Knight promotion, Markus is of course now a big fan of the Lady of the Lake. Prior to that, he was a dedicated worshipper of the gods Tal and Raya, the nature deities for most of mankind in fantasy. As a farmer by trade and someone experienced with traveling the wooded forests of Ostland, giving praise to them is a logical move. If you play Vermintide, you will no doubt notice his Tal worship, as him screaming "By Tal" is an audio line that I'm pretty sure is always at full volume, even if you turn down your audio settings. As a person, Markus Kruber is the classic standard guy of the Ubersreik Five. His companions are a wizard, a witch hunter, a dwarf, and an elf, one of the weirder elves for that matter. He's an experienced soldier, but that's just the standard career path of most Warhammer characters that aren't background footnotes. Even as a Grail Knight, the worst that's happened to him is he's gotten himself a bit of an ego, calling Victor a peasant and saying he outranks him now. On that note, he might just be giving Saltzpyre a hard time because he finds it funny. He also keeps trying to pull off a Bretonnian/French accent, which Kerillian begs him to try in a Bretonnian tavern so she can watch him get the shit kicked out of him. For all his bravery, he's just a person. In dialogue, he'll fight with Kerillian over her constantly pestering him about his loyalty to Saltzpyre, but he'll also bicker with Saltzpyre when he gets a bit too Saltzpyre-y. He's a bit afraid of Sienna's powers going out of control, but he does like her as a person. And of course, if there's nothing better to do, you can probably find him 6 mugs of ale deep alongside Bardin. He's determined to see the Empire through these times, which in itself is a bit less noteworthy because he's a video game protagonist and those are insanely brave by default, but again, everyone everyone around him is far better equipped for that sort of thing. Victor's been trained since childhood to be a witch hunter, Sienna can light people on fire with a thought, Bardin's a dwarf so inherently stout and resolute, and Kerillian is a wood elf, which if nothing else means she's at least a little bit insane. Markus is just a guy, but he fights on with the rest of them, and in gameplay at least is as often as not the core of the team the others fight around. For a final few fun facts, there's official character sheets for every single one of the Ubersreik Five for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, for the 4th edition I believe. Here's Markus's, and while it should be noted that they're all portrayed as reasonably powerful characters and not the protagonists of a Left 4 Dead clone, his stats aren't that bad. He's a decent fighter and all things considered fairly charismatic, just like he is in the game. And as our final fun fact, he apparently loves listening to Kerillian sing as a Vermintide too. So enjoy that tidbit, people who like to imagine Yvraine and Gilman going at it like rabbits. It's a barely at all acknowledged thing here in Vermintide, which is infinitely more canon than it is in 40k. Oh, he also almost always calls himself Kruber instead of Markus, and everyone around him largely does the same, except for Sienna. Having some friends who still call me by my last name because they knew another Colin first and the habit just stuck around, I get it. Alright, final fun fact now. Kruber dislikes Karl Franz because he thinks Karl Franz is spending all of the tax money on hats when he should be using it to give everyone magical swords like he has. Karl Franz also apparently stole a hat from Kruber once by way of abusing his power as the Emperor to do so. This is clearly seething and coping about a misunderstanding from an otherwise stand-up guy, or alternatively, anything Karl Franz does is morally right by default, so him stealing that hat from Kruber was a good thing to do. A dwarfier dwarf you have never met, although at the same time by Warhammer standards, you've also never met a less dwarfy dwarf. Bardin's fun, and to jump ahead a bit, if there were more people like Bardin in the world, we'd be in a lot better place than we are now in life. Bardin's reason for ending up in Ubersreik was a treasure hunt. He, as many other dwarfs have, was searching for the lost dwarf hold of Goreksson. Well, yes, in Total Warhammer, it's kind of right over there, and some guy can just randomly stumble upon it in an expedition. That's mostly for gameplay purposes, I presume. In lore, the thing was probably overrun by lizardmen. Bardin was looking for it, and had come to Ubersreik to grab a book that supposedly held the key to finding the lost hold. He was a dwarf ranger from the Grey Mountains, one of those dwarfs who in Warhammer spend more time outside a mountain than in it. One day he found an abandoned mine of dwarf origin, but one he had somehow never seen after decades of wandering, and when he entered, he found a party of dead dwarfs with fragments of a map to Goreksson. He couldn't quite read the map, unfortunately, but that was what the book was for later on. Bardin's quest to find Goreksson wasn't the most popular, though, as even for the dwarfs who were determined to reclaim all that they lost, Goreksson was one of those things that most considered not worth looking for. But Bardin kept at it, and prior to Ubersreik, he could be found traveling damn near the entire Empire in his quest to translate the map fragments he found. Of course, his determination to find the lost hold might also come from an exile, self-imposed or not, after his failure during a mission as a ranger led the Skaven to slaughter many in a dwarf hold, including his own son. That was brought up by Bellicor taunting the party in-game, so Lord knows how true it is, but one of the potential classes Bardin can be is a slayer, so there's some evidence it is at least partially true. Regardless, I'll stop jumping around so much now, because as with the other four, he would become part of the Skaven attack on Ubersreik and jump into the fray just as the rest of them did. Rather hilariously, the first person of the group he met was Kerillian, but the dwarf and elf managed to hold off on killing each other. Probably because even for two races with such a long history of animosity, a Skaven invasion is one of the best ways to make unlikely friends. Come Vermintide 2, and Bardin's own little narrative progresses further and further. As it turns out, even if his son is dead, he's still got a daughter. Even better than that, she was a dwarf submariner, which is cool as hell. In one mission, you eventually rescue her even, or at least I think it was rescuing her. She talks to you in the party over tubes, and it's hard to hear her over the non-stop Skaven and Chaos warrior assault, but at the end of the day, it seems she sometimes visits Helmgart to chat with her pa. He even had a bit of a return to his roots at some point as well. As a ranger, Bardin was always a bit of an outsider amongst dwarfs, even ignoring the exile thing. No truly proper dwarf, after all, would willingly spend most of their time above ground. And in Warhammer, dwarfs also aren't the biggest fans of new tech. It isn't Mechanicus levels where innovation gets you killed, but it's more so if you don't spend 500 years in the blueprint stages, everyone's gonna be really judgmental of you. If something actually goes wrong with it though, then you're expected to kill yourself. Bardin used to be on the path to become an engineer in the footsteps of his uncle, but his uncle ended up taking the Slayer Oath for some unfortunate shenanigans, and Bardin instead joined the ranks of the Ironbreakers for a bit. But since he's now living with humans and an elf, Bardin figured to hell with it. I'm making a minigun. He tinkered, and sure enough, the Outcast Engineer DLC honestly is him doing just that. Alternatively, sometimes he's sticking true to his ranger roots, sometimes he's an Ironbreaker again, and sometimes he's taking the Slayer Oath as a result of his past shame with his son and all that. Those of you familiar are likely screaming that's not how the Slayer Oath works, and you're right. That's a one and done deal. Once you're a Slayer, you're one until you die. As it turns out though, the Ubersreik Five are a bit cursed, blessed, or both. Those glowing portals in Vermintide 2 aren't just a way to end the mission without breaking the animation budget. Those are shadow magic portals. Shadow magic has a way of making things unclear, muddling history itself sometimes, and even changing the past a bit. And as Franz Lohner, the innkeeper/spy who gives you missions, noted and brought up to them once, the Ubersreik Five have a bit of magical amnesia going on. At one point he noticed these changes were happening, and with Bardin it was the most obvious. You could excuse Kruber going from hunter to foot knight based on which loadout he wanted to take. There's theoretically nothing keeping him from being both of those things. But Bardin, well, as Lohner says, you can't really take off the Slayer Oath. You can find this bit and a whole lot of others in Lohner's journal, which is a periodically updated thing that Fat Shark releases on their website. It also has Bardin's daughter Hedda's own chronicles, which is cool to see. He also has a wife still out there that he's unsure if he should reconnect with or not, occasionally mentioning it during missions with a wistful, remorseful tone in his voice. She's apparently incredibly good at killing greenskins. Dami Mami Shortstack wife got me questioning my loyalty to the Phoenix King, fellas. And of course Cousin Okri, who according to Bardin is the Warhammer fantasy version of those old Chuck Norris memes. Lohner talks to him sometimes. There's no art of him, and if half of what Bardin says about him is true, then I cannot understand how the end times happened. Cousin Okri would have simply intervened. Anyways, when Lohner brought all this up, it made the rest of them incredibly uncomfortable, because even aside from Bardin, Kerillian also at one point went through some pretty substantial changes as well. Imagine you suddenly have a revelation granted to you by God, giving you magical powers and a new purpose. Then suddenly, that still happened, but you've also shifted back to before that, where you're kind of just another person. Then you're suddenly serving the queen of another group of elves, and then back to the magical transformation version of you. And you're only kind of aware of all of this because magic is really messing with you. It's a bit uncomfortable for them is my point, no doubt because their very souls seem to be affected in some ways. Aside from that mess though, and even if you are playing Slayer Bardin, he's a very upbeat fella. One of those journal entries mentions how the other members of the group, as well as NPCs you never get to see, can sometimes be found feeling a bit down. They live in Warhammer and the end times are happening. It's understandable. If that happens, Bardin will seem to just appear next to them, drinks in hand and waiting to hear them out. He'll spend some time with the weary soul, let them vent, and then vanish back into the night with the other person just feeling a little bit better. He's that kind of friend, a real pal always willing to hear you out and make sure you get the support you need. If we had more Bardins, the world really would be a better place. Bardin does have one crucial character flaw, however, and no, it's not whatever happened that led to his son dying. As Left 4 Dead style game, the characters will naturally call out whenever a special enemy is approaching. They'll say Rattling Gunner when there's a Rattling Gunner, stuff like that. Sometimes they might say Assassin Rat if it's a gutter runner, but that's still a clearly defined enemy. I know what Assassin Rat is, that's very simple. And then Bardin goes, there's a Rekigomungul, and I just have to sit there wondering if I heard that right, if all those years of listening to my headphones on full blast have finally caught up to me or not. Bardin, I don't know what these words mean, I don't speak Khazalid. What's funny is most dwarfs in Warhammer don't speak Khazalid around non-dwarfs. They're a secretive people and that extends to their language. But even around people he's just met, Bardin is speaking it left, right, and center, which can be a problem in-game. I'll hear the words, there's a Raga Bulginglor, and I have to sit there trying to figure out what the hell that could possibly mean before I turn a corner and suddenly there's a rat ogre pushing my shit in. I don't know what you're saying, Bardin. Please stop shouting nonsense at me. As a final note, Slayer Bardin. The whole thing with their memories, careers, and souls being changed by some higher power or magic is a fun way to explain switching your classes in Vermintide. But none of that matters. What matters is that you, as a person playing Slayer Bardin, nut up and leap into every single patrol you find on the map. I don't care that it's making the team fight unnecessary battles, or a waste of time and resources, or that you're throwing the game, Colin. Grimnir demands a worthy death, goddammit. You aren't throwing the game, you're being lore accurate to a Slayer, and if the run ends there, that's simply Grimnir's will being fulfilled. Some characters I forget the name of, I'll be real with you. I always go to call Barabbas Dantiok Barbarous Dantiok, for example. No idea why. With Kerillian, I can remember her name no problem. Spelling her name, I will write it in 50 slightly different ways, as I have indeed done in this script looking through it. I feel that's very wood elfy of a thing to do though, so I'm just gonna live with it. Kerillian is your classic homegrown from Athel lore and wood elf. She's therefore judgmental, racist, insane, and at least a little bit corrupted by the spirit of Athel Lauren. Corrupted isn't necessarily the right right word, but it's the best I've got for that place and what it does to someone. Kerillian as a young elf girl was a curious little bugger, to the point that she'd try and stalk actual waystalkers while they were patrolling the forest just to see if she could stay hidden from them. This is another point in favor of her being a little bit crazy, because parts of Athelloren really don't like wood elves and other parts are outright chaos corrupted, but little chibi Kerillian was wandering in and following the grown-ups around. By the time she grew up, she sure enough became a waystalker herself, prowling the forests of Athelloren to scour it of foes. Of course, as is the case with the Vermintide characters, excepting Markus Kruber, she's not quite on the same page as everyone else in her faction is. Her curiosity was insatiable, and of course this would get her in trouble. Similar to Bardin, and I'm sure this causes her no small amount of pain that she shares that much in common with a dwarf, she was exiled from Athelloren. The reason was that she had interrupted a ritual by another elf dedicated to Hekardi, the goddess of magic on the evil side of the elf pantheon. For context, high and dark elves will occasionally flee to Athelloren and become wood elves. The reasons are as varied as you can think of, and of course not all of them are honest in their transition. Some simply wish to plunder the forest for secrets, as did one former Dark Elf. As a male wizard amongst the Dark Elves and therefore destined for death on Malekith's orders, it would be a logical guess to assume he went to the forest simply to escape death. In a ritual one day, he had sacrificed forest spirits, and so Kerillian shot him, but apparently he was a popular sort of fella, so his friends got Kerillian exiled. Similar story to Bardin in some ways, like I said, but unlike him, Kerillian didn't care. She wandered into the realms of men and dwarf without a care in the world, because goddammit she wanted to see that world. Even as a strange wood elf who actively wanted to leave Athelloren, she was still a wood elf, and can't help herself from doing all sorts of cryptic nonsense and war crimes that largely make sense only to her. There's a throwaway line in the game where Kruber says she shoots good, and she says she should have seen her at another battle where she killed dozens. Saltzpyre then remarked that 2 entire regiments of Imperial state troops from Nuln vanished without a trace there, and the conversation shortly ends. While I'm not entirely sure if it's the same battle, she did also in fact help destroy an Imperial force on its way to Ubersreik that could have at least kept the situation potentially winnable when the Skaven invaded the town. She did this because, you know, wood elf reasons. Some prophecy or future reading or whatever said Ubersreik would cause harm to the weave and nature, so she jumped right in and started killing humans. Turns out that, yeah, that prophecy was right, but of course it was the Skaven and Ubersreik that would ultimately do the harming, so she goofed there to be sure. As mentioned, she and Bardin were the first of the 5 to meet, nearly killing each other before the Skaven showed up. She tags along with the 5 supposedly incredibly reluctantly, and naturally with constant references and threats to leave the moment she can. And of course, she never actually leaves. Tsundere little elf can't help but want to stick around her lumberfoots. She sure enough constantly spends time verbally sniping with the rest of the crew, but because the dialogue and character interactions of these games honestly belong in a series that isn't a Left 4 Dead clone with how good they are, you can get a sense over time of just what kind of person she is. Loner notes that Kerillian is a secretive person half the time, far too open about some things the rest of the time. For example, Kerillian might not actually be her name, or at least not her only name, or at least not her true name, or at least not her only true name. She's fought, bled, and killed next to the other 4 for years, and she hasn't even had the courtesy to tell her if Kerillian is her proper name. On the other hand, she freely admits to slaughtering an army of Imperials, to another Imperial, in front of a witch hunter. Some of it is standard wood elf stuff, but Loner can't help but wonder if there's some issues with her opening up to people, because no average wood elf would willingly be traveling with non-wood elves this long. They would have assembled the forest spirits and their comrades and dealt with the issue instead. And she does eventually admit to liking the rest of the crew, even at one point apologizing to Markus for some shitty things she said, relating with Bardin, who in turn tells Markus to lay off her a bit, and discussing strange dreams she had with Saltzpyre of all people. She likes her new friends, even if she's too stubborn to admit it most of the time. Kerillian over the course of the second game for her classes went through some of the most radical changes of all of them, tied only with Sienna probably. The standard and first classes are continuing on as a waystalker, the simple wood elf marksman sniping enemies from afar and snarking the whole time. And then immediately we enter Wacky Land. Apparently, Alariel the Everqueen herself pulled some subtle mystical strings and caused Kerillian to discover a shrine of the goddess Isha, with her dedicating herself both to the goddess and Everqueen as a handmaiden of Isha. I won't say she becomes nicer, but it's harder to find proof she's ultimately a good person at heart than working as a direct, if distant, part of the Everqueen's personal army. As a side note, Kruber was worried about it being forced on her, so he offered to beat up the person who had her become a handmaiden. To reiterate, Kruber offered to march to Ulthuan and beat the piss out of Valariel, the Ever-Queen of the High Elves, because he was worried about his pal. And all he had to say about the difficulties involved was, oh, so there'd be a bit of a bodyguard problem. Fellas, get yourself a friend who will ride or die for you half as hard as Markus Kruber. In another class, she finds out she had a dark elf ancestor, and because we need to up the ante for the next class, Cain himself was apparently talking to her, telling her to take up the mantle of her ancestor and become a dark elf shade. She even gets vaguely purple with this class for some reason. Similar to the previous, she doesn't really appear more outwardly malicious in terms of personality, but genuinely I think that's because she's such a tsundere that short of outright telling someone she's going to slit their throat in their sleep, she can only get so much more hostile. Which occasionally, the Ubersreik Five do say they'll beat the snot out of each other, so even that wouldn't do much if she was more violently vocal. And with her DLC class, she's had the most extreme transformation yet. Some Azrai go on a bit of a spiritual journey in Athelorn and give up parts of themselves to the forest. Men become wild riders of Kurnos, and women, as with Kerillian, became sisters of the Thorn. Sure enough, Kerillian becomes one of them, and with her at least it was so extreme that she's partially made out of plant. Per her own words, she's the best and worst of what she was, with every part of her seemingly amplified. Though it's said she gave up her regret as well, some of her dialogue implies that isn't entirely the case. If nothing else though, she is far more in tune with the weave than ever before, as can be expected when you replace part of yourself with magical trees on behest of the Wood Elf Queen of the Woods, Ariel. It should be noted that this change came about as a result of the group's journey into the Chaos Waste, that little roguelike game mode Vermintide 2 has. It seems that unlike some of the others, her favored goddess of Lilith doesn't answer her prayers. That in itself could also be intentional, since especially with the end times, Lilith was revealed to be quite the manipulative deity with all her schemes and crap, so maybe her silence was a way to push Kerillian to becoming a servant of Ariel. But yeah, she ended up dedicating herself to the forest, with some little tidbits about how after Lilith didn't answer, she just started throwing prayers to anyone she could think of for a bit. To some, that might be heretical, but at the same time, in a fantasy setting, praying to whatever random god you can think of is a valid way to find out who actually likes you. It worked for Felix in one of the early Gotrek and Felix books, no reason it couldn't work for the elf. Kerillian's fun. She's snarky, and I gotta be honest, for most people I can safely assume that her constant sarcasm after you go down might get annoying, but she stuck around her companions long enough that some dialogue has her opening up, and she's definitely got a heart underneath all the thorns. She's a shy elf lady that opens up slowly but still cares about her teammates. Even Victor Saltzpyre, who spends most of the first game wishing for her death, and all of the second game verbally sparring with her. Also, I would like to apologize to everyone for the following statement, because I have to share the fact that every time she calls me a lumberfoot, I paint the walls with cum. Blessed Sigma. With that out of the way, behold the witch-hunteriest witch hunter to ever hunt witches. Born the son of a blacksmith, a witch hunter one day took notice of him and thought he might make a good candidate to become one himself. The guy was right, because Victor passed the trials to become a witch hunter with flying colors. Not much is said about Victor's experience specifically, but the Witch Hunter Handbook talks about how grueling those trials are, so Victor was proving himself a badass even before he began his career proper. For a while, he was just another witch hunter, certainly an especially dedicated one, but nothing made him stand out too much. Until one day, he was investigating some shenanigans with a vampire, specifically the thrall of one, who was an influential mayor within the Empire and was getting his daughter to also become a thrall. So far so standard when it comes to the vampire counts, but this fine example of Imperial society was also double-dealing by trading Warpstone with the Skaven as well. When Victor tracked him down, the Skaven naturally followed, as wherever Warpstone is, so too can they be found eventually. The details of the incident are unclear as well, although in this case it seems that because Saltzpyre is repressing exactly what went down, especially with whatever fate the mayor's daughter suffered. The end result was a victory, however, as while he lost an eye, he remained alive to properly trial and sentence the mayor to death. That by the book's attitude is a trait you should take note of, by the way, as I'll be discussing it again. After this incident, he became obsessed with the Skaven, and much like the rest of the five except for Kruber, became a little bit ostracized from the rest of the Order of the Silver Hammer as a result. The Skaven's existence was never revealed to him, as it's officially something that isn't a thing in the Empire, and this enraged Victor. He wanted these ratmen dead immediately, and though he received little if any support from his colleagues, he dedicated himself to purging the ratmen wherever he could find them. And he, unlike almost any other Imperial, was actively looking for the Skaven, and by virtue of him being a playable character, we can assume he did good work to get to that point. The witch hunters generally don't suffer incompetency in their ranks, so even if they disapproved of his chosen specialty, they couldn't fault his results enough to exile or kill him. By the time of Vermintide 1, he was doing one of his rare non-Skaven related activities by escorting Sienna to face trial for supposed murder, with Kruber as his bodyguard. Once again, they also form an unlikely alliance with the others, and of course, many a Skaven is slaughtered. Victor was probably the least happy with the circumstances, even including Kerillian, at least when it comes to 3 of the 4 others. He likes Kruber, since Kruber, especially in Vermintide 1, was just an Imperial soldier, the kind of lad Victor approves of, a proper Empire man. Sienna's a witch and therefore inherently heretical. Even as a dwarf, he was somewhat distrustful of Bardin, which is fairly surprising, and even more than Sienna, he hated Kerillian. To Saltzpyre, that damn elf was a puzzle whose only solution was heresy, and he wanted no part of her. Were it not for the Skaven invasion, he probably would have shot her faster than Bardin would have. Over time, he opened up to them, though honestly about as slowly as Kerillian did, which is funny because she's an elf with various reasons to open to non-elves slowly. Saltzpyre's just a dude, a witch hunter, sure, but also kind of an asshole to be honest. And quite vocal about his faith as well. Never is there a moment he won't inform the others of the glory of Sigmar, and how Sigmar is the greatest, and how witches and elves are evil, and that the dwarfs are alright, but still nothing compared to honest Sigmarites. His faith in Sigmar is truly all-encompassing, as anyone who's played the game knows well. At least every other line is him giving praise to Sigmar, or saying how he'll strike down his foes in Sigmar's name. Please sir, I'd like an order of Sigmar with a side of Sigmar, extra Sigmar sauce please. He is the most devoted character in all of Warhammer. This man knows nothing but the Heldenhammer. The closest he ever gets to doubting his faith were 2 instances, one of which barely counts because it was during that special event where your characters get drunk. He wanted to be a steam tank driver because tanks are awesome, and that's not really doubting Sigmar. That's just wanted to drive a tank, which, hell yeah, of course someone wants to drive a tank. As the games went on, various careers opened to him based on how he handled the aftermath of Ubersreik. His starting one is becoming a witch hunter captain, both because of his stellar service and because with the end times happening, the witch hunters were just promoting everyone they could to replace losses. Another option is the bounty hunter class, where he essentially becomes a free agent. He's technically still a witch hunter, but he largely does mercenary work when not on a mission to fund his war against the Ratmen. Alternatively, he could become a flagellant, those poor souls who believe doom is around the corner and faith in Sigmar is the only possible option left. Not that far from what he was already, but now he's half naked and totally insane about it. And his DLC career and the final option for him is to become a warrior priest of Sigmar. The second time Saltzpyre's faith was found just a bit wanting was his own perspective during the Chaos Waste missions. The entire thing was his idea to reach a shrine deep in the waste where you could supposedly commune directly with the gods, and no, not just the Chaos ones. Bellacor's taunts to him involved questioning his faith, and some of Saltzpyre's voice lines did seem to indicate doubt. Unlike Kerillian though, it would seem that Sigmar decided to answer Saltzpyre, given his utter dedication beyond any other. After all, it's only human to doubt. Becoming a human capable of channeling divine magic, Saltzpyre now serves the witch hunters as a warrior priest of Sigmar, bringing forth divine power to smash his foes down, be they Norscan or Skaven. Unfortunately for Bardin, this and the Grail Knight class are both the melee-only class like the Slayer, but better in every way, which, while demands a page in the book, no doubt gives Victor some amount of smoke satisfaction. As a person, over the games his icy heart did thaw, if only a bit. He sees Kruber as a genuine friend, got at least a bit used to Bardin's seemingly endless cheer, has brought himself down to only spying on Kerillian instead of planning to kill her, and even tolerates Sienna and her witchery. He's not kind, not truly anyways, but he sees it as a harsh necessity, and as a witch hunter active during the literal end of the world, I find it hard to completely blame him for the attitude. As I said earlier, Saltzpyre even confided in Kerillian when he had dreams of presumably the end times as well, an amount of trust towards a wood elf few if any other witch hunters would ever show. Sienna says he's a big old soft on the inside, which while I'm not totally sure on, he did adopt a cat as shown in some of Loner's journal entries. He feeds it scraps and I'm sure at least on occasion bits of dead Skaven. Oddly cute, the whole affair. And it should be noted that when he was taking Sienna in before Vermintide 1, he was genuinely going to have her tried properly. You can say what you want about the Empire killing mages and whether or not Sienna might have deserved it, but he's not the kind of witch hunter to take matters into his own hands in a way that breaks the spirit of his office. He will see any potential criminal or heretic tried and convicted 100% legally, including the mayor from his backstory that he saw outright dealing with Skaven and vampires firsthand. At his worst, he can be a monster, but he's a monster that will see his duty done properly and without innocent lives wasted, if only because, like the Emperor over in 40k, the lives of the not-Germans are Sigmar's currency to be spent well. He even regrets what's happened to Sienna with her own DLC class, avoiding her so he doesn't have to confront her, and saying that if she finally snaps, he'll grant her a painless death. In Warhammer, that's damn near as close to someone like him can come to being nice, and I admire him for it a bit. He has his principles and he'll stick to them, but he'll make exception not for his friends, but for proven comrades and allies who do good work and he knows he can trust. And of course, if you need a man in your corner, you can do no better than him if you can get him on your side. When I mentioned he doubted Sigmar a bit earlier, I meant a bit. A tiny, tiny bit. He's another ride or die, although in Victor's case he's a lot more likely to kill for you than die for you. May holy Sigmar bless his ravaged body as the end times draw to a close. I couldn't figure out if I should make a reference to Johnny Storm, Yang from Ruby, or a Rimworld Pyromaniac here, so pretend I referenced all of them organically, so 3 different kinds of people can soyjack point at their screens for me having brought them up. Anyways, Sienna is a bright wizard, a mage with a connection and ability to easily wield Akshi, the Wind of Fire. Having been born in the nation of Astalia, she was sent to the Empire as a child to be taught how to harness her abilities. That, and she might have been at risk of being killed for being a witch, where at least in the Empire, magical children are almost always taught how to be wizards and whatnot first. She was taught by a fella named Rambler, a shadow wizard. Unfortunately, Rambler's main method of teaching appeared to be beating Sienna over the head, which eventually resulted in her losing control and burning him alive. In spite of this, she did apparently continue learning at the colleges of Magic and Altdorf, although her bad habits only grew. She didn't just wield fire, she loved fire. She really was a Rimworld Pyromaniac pawn, although unless you're modding the game, those assholes aren't wizards attuned to fire magic. She'd always try to make the brightest fire, the most explosive fireball. The Bright College, to be sure, encourages their students to be passionate, since the Wind of Fire does cause their tempers to flare, but there's passion, and then there's lighting forest fires because you like to watch shit burn. She was repeatedly warned to cool off, as it were, and never listened. This isn't what got her in trouble, though. It would have eventually in the college, but the colleges of magic took no action against her. What did cause problems was when she got word her twin sister was accused of necromancy. Obviously not wanting her sister killed for a crime she didn't commit, she rushed to save her twin and ended up burning down an entire town to do it. Turns out her sister really was a necromancer, however, and in spite of her fleeing the scene, Sienna eventually tracked her down and handled the problem the way all bright wizards handle problems they face. Fire. She would travel the lands and sell her services to the highest bidder as a trained bright wizard, because in spite of being far too obsessed with fire, she is trained in her arts. One task would take her to the Talayan city of Miragliano, which she burnt down a good chunk of while collecting debts. Just a little bit of an oopsie daisy, you know? What are you gonna do? Eventually, after she torched the son of a prominent imperial mayor, who was admittedly a serial killer, but that sort of execution isn't exactly following due process, she fell into Saltzpyre's custody and was to be tried and all that. And by this point, I'm sure you know what happens next. Ubersreik, Skaven, holy shit, that's a rat ogre behind that door, how did that fit, that's such bullshit. And she earns the respect and trust of the others to varying degrees. She gets on with Kerillian, surprisingly enough, and Kruber and Bardin are the easiest fellas to talk to ever, so that's a given. Saltzpyre initially would have been happy to see her hanged, but he did chill out over it as much as he wishes Sienna would literally chill out as well. While Kerillian is centuries old and has traveled the world, it was always as a bit of an observer, shooting things from afar, stalking them, stuff that's let her travel, and as an Azrai she's attuned to the natural weave of things, but it's left her lacking in some ways. Sienna, meanwhile, has taken odd jobs across the old world. She's a trained wizard even if she often doesn't act like it. She's been through some pretty awful shit and was ready to be hanged. She comes across as far more worldly and wizened than the others, an attitude that admittedly does get lost in her flame sometimes. But at the end of the day, she's a pretty amicable person who has a go-with-the-flow attitude and is happy to share some learned wisdom as needed. Plenty of sarcasm too, because she also works overtime as the sassy grandma of the five. And if nothing else, the group could hate her guts and still keep her around. There's few things better for combat when you're outnumbered 1,000 to 1 than a bright wizard. Turns out setting alight entire regiments of Skaven at once gives people a reason to keep you around during a Skaven invasion. Her different base game classes all have her in varying degrees of mastering her pyromania. In the standard battle wizard class, she's kept up with actually studying magical control. While it's pained her to do so, she's learned the value of keeping at least a bit of a lid on her flames and has mastered them to a far greater degree than ever before. As a pyromancer, it's a halfway point. She's not totally consumed by the flames, but she sure as hell isn't holding back at any moment. And as the Unchained class, she's gone completely bonkers. Control is for losers, subtlety is for idiots, and books are for nerds. Sienna want big fire, and Sienna want big fire now. That's a class destined for tragedy, but not the worst class of the sort for her, believe it or not. See, turns out when Sienna burnt her twin alive, it didn't quite stick. Given her sister Sophia was a necromancer, this is understandable. Necromancers aren't known for being easy to kill, or rather, they aren't known for staying dead. The group dealt with her once again off-screen, but this time it had a pretty horrid effect on Sienna. They found her one day with summoned skeletons in her sleep to guard her, and far worse than that is that her connection to the Wind of Akshi appears to just be gone. There's a whole load of reasons to explain what happened, none of which are good. The simplest is that in the desperation the group finds themselves in, she took the ultimate plunge and opened books on necromancy her sister had to learn them. Come the end of the world, nothing is off the table as Sienna may see it. Her being corrupted is another possibility, as necromantic magic does have corrupting effects, and she's fought her necromantic twin twice. Alternatively, twins in fantasy settings often have magical connections even if both the twins in question aren't magical. Since Sienna and Sophia were, you can explain it with anything from a part of her sister's spirit rubbing off on her to outright possession. Some of the dialogue seems to indicate Sienna might not quite be Sienna anymore, which is something Kruber brings up frequently. And of course, this is the end times, remember? Death magic early on in the event blew strongly, for nothing less than the full-blown return and ascension of Nagash was occurring on the other side of the world. I don't think it's at all impossible that Nagash's will may be reaching out to Sienna for another minion, as other gods and beings have reached out to the rest of the cast. It's not like it's beyond his abilities, for after all, such is the power of Nagash. In any case, the Ubersreik Five now have a necromancer in their midst, ignoring the moments where suddenly she's briefly a fire wizard again and the magical shenanigans afflicting the group are in full swing, because you didn't want to play a necromancer that day. They're all varying levels of concern, of course, with Bardin actually being the least concerned overall, which is surprising. Dwarfs aren't exactly the most accepting of magic, period, let alone necromancy, but Bardin swivels on a pendulum between being the dwarfiest and undwarfiest dowie around, so I guess it's fitting. Markus is afraid for her as a person more than anything, what with Sienna's apparent potential possession by her sister's soul, which is especially heartwarming given his backstory of losing his unit to a necromancer. It also makes one of the friendly fire lines incredibly funny, because sometimes when Markus would shoot Sienna, she'd shout, "Not a necromancer!" Boy, if that didn't age like milk. Kerillian, being her wood elf self, varies between relating to Sienna by talking about the voices in her head and judging her for being a blasphemy against the weave. And as for our resident witch hunter's opinion on his new necromancer colleague, well, aside from showing a surprising amount of restraint and sadness over the affair, I think it's safe to say he really wishes he could just be a steam tank driver now. As for their fates, there is the unfortunate reality that the end times are happening. Vermintide 1 wasn't just called Vermintide, you know, it was called the End Times Vermintide. The world's ending and nothing they can do will change that. But allow me to present a theory to you, if you don't mind. Alicia, the Shadowmancer who makes those portals they travel to in the second game, is clearly a skilled and knowledgeable person. She has her own version of Loner's Journal on a website as well, showing she's quite up to date with occurrences as any good Shadow Wizard should be. It is by no means impossible that in a potential third game, the cast may find themselves going through a portal and ending up not in their next mission, but the mortal realms of the Age of Sigmar. The first game ended in that kind of way, just not quite to the next setting. In the magical mess that is the end of the Warhammer world, who's to say an unlikely group of heroes won't survive the destruction of their home, only to end up called to duty once more in a strange new set of realities. Alternatively, these five have killed far too many rats and chaos warriors for them to be killed by something as small as the world ending. I mean, come on now, at the very least Cousin Aukri would save them if only to help Bardin out. And that was the Ubersreik Five. And one more time together now, folks. Or four, it doesn't matter. Be they normal for their factions or wielding powerful magics of the gods themselves, one thing remains ever certain. Wherever they tread, the Skaven are sure to die by the thousands. And because I forgot to mention it earlier, here's one last fun fact. Those paintings you can put up in the keep in the second game are painted by a woman who lives in the keep named Katrine. She has a crush on Saltzpyre of all people, and Bardin apparently keeps eating her paintbrushes. What a magical setting Warhammer Fantasy is, where dwarfs eat paintbrushes and old witch hunters are considered prime dating material. Really makes a single man wonder what the hell he's doing wrong. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the healing draught to my Ubersreik Five, keeping me going just a little bit longer as I slaughter thousands of beings that absolutely deserve it. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. You cannot understand the amount of bodies I would stack in order to sniff Kerillian's feet. Holy fuck, dude. She's like the ultimate combination of a Hello Kitty, goth, astrology, and weird crystal girls. I need Azrai pussy so bad.